That's one of the things that Swami Kriyananda loved about Dana, was that she just used this in so many different ways, and that her theory and philosophy, the way she works, can be applied through the arts, but it can be applied much more broadly than just the arts. In fact, that's probably where many of us fit in. Using creative process to solve any of life's problems can bring us much closer to accomplishing that. So we'll have her speak in a couple of minutes, and let's begin with a prayer before we do that. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, dearest friend, Divine Beloved, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow before you. Bless our meeting with an awareness of your presence. Help us to open our hearts and our minds, that we may receive your love and your wisdom. Help us to be open to new ways to channel that love and wisdom. Give us guidance and the will and strength to follow it. Divine Mother, we are your little children. Surround us with your arms. Draw us back home to thee. Oh, peace. Amen. Okay, Dana, let's have fun.
Thank you, Rumurti. I really appreciate your inviting me, and I'm happy to be here with you all. And I appreciate what you said about Swami appreciating the way that I was thinking, but I have to say my thoughts have really evolved appreciating the way Swami thinks. And you know, I had the real extraordinary privilege and honor of being able to spend time with Swamiji and have conversations with Swamiji about art and consciousness and culture and consciousness, really, because as almost all of the great ones are, he was tuned in to things that were in the ether far in advance of their actual manifestation. And in creating all that he created, the communities of Ananda, there's always been a thread of understanding that we're in it for the spiritual path and for the depth of communion that we can receive and the ultimately the liberation from the limitations of this encasement in material reality. But there's also been the strong stream of helping to be a part of the awakening of Dwapara Yuga. You know, the seeds of Dwapara are being sown in this approach. And for those of you who may not be familiar, there's an Indian philosophy deep in the Indian tradition of the yoga tradition, and I would say even the Sanatana Dharma, because it's not necessarily even an Indian tradition. There's the understanding of the yugas or grand epics or ages, and we are moving out of an age of form and matter and materialism, and ultimately consumerism too, and a way of thinking and being that has kept us very limited and very encased in a reality that is primarily engaged with the material world around us. But we're moving into an age of energy. We're moving into an age that is seeing the energy beneath the form, seeing the maybe not with even our physical eyes, but with the instruments of science, being able to see the atoms and the molecules and the things that are stirring beneath the form. It's been several centuries of awakening from the spell of external reality. And that is being pushed through the sciences and through all of the unfoldments in culture. But this particular moment right now is an acceleration of that. It's an acceleration of letting go of the forms that we've held in society and for ourselves in our daily lives. We have been kind of in the in-between time, the generations in between eras, so that we know that Einstein came up with incredible revelations of energy equals matter, E equals mc squared, that there's an equivalency, that they move into each other. But how many of us have lived in that reality? We've understood it sort of intellectually, but it takes time for this to become something that comes alive to us as how we view and perceive the world. I've said before, I was astonished to learn that so few people knew about the Copernican revolution when it happened. You know, Copernicus has this whole mind-bending shift of perspective, a massive paradigm shift, but for several centuries, only a handful of people understood it or knew about it. And I think there's a parallel in the sense that in the time since Einstein, there's been, you know, at first a small group and then a growing group of people who are like awakening to what that reality actually means for us. And one of the things that it means most of all is that the forms that we are familiar with are going to be dissolving faster and faster as we accelerate into an age of energy. So in my grandparents' time, they might have lived their whole lives in whatever town they were in and not really had a lot of change or exposure to change or exposure to other realities. And we're in acceleration now. And so things shift faster and faster. And now we've reached a critical threshold point where the whole, you know, this time period of the coronavirus, the time period of the great sheltering in place pause that we've taken, has brought overnight, in the wink of an eye, an extraordinary degree of change that probably most of us 6 months ago wouldn't have thought was possible. That so much in such a very short period of time could dramatically shift. And whole ways of doing and being are dissolving and probably not going to come back. Like we're probably not going to go back to an normal reality that is somehow resonant to, you know, nostalgic feelings of how we used to do it. But what we have the opportunity to do is go forward into a regenerative, created, newly, freshly born reality that comes out of that dissolution. So we are actually in the midst of something quite extraordinary, a time period that is stretched open to more potential and possibility than ordinary life normally delivers. And so that's one of the reasons that I feel so enlivened, because the work that I do is called Transformative Arts, and Transformative Arts works with the idea that that the vehicles of art, the vessels of art, the paint, the clay, the collage, whatever material you're working with, that is just a modality, a means for getting your consciousness to open up. And even the word transform means a cross form, like transform. And so in the creative process, we're constantly creating forms like, oh, here's a painting, or even here's a moment in a painting, here's a splash of red, here's the green dribbling across. This is a form, but the form keeps changing. And what we are engaging with is working with our consciousness at that moment. We're not in that transformative arts process trying to make the product, the form. We're using the process of engaging form, changing form, to awaken our consciousness and to get to a place which is really, you know, a dormant higher capacity that we all have, to be widely aware, to have our aperture inside stretched open so that we can play with forms. So like in a creative arts process, it starts out normally, just to say, you know, with people coming often that have never done it before, and they think I'm not an artist, or, you know, and they come in, and at first everybody's kind of tense or nervous or meh, and within a couple of hours we have everybody just laughing and playing and being childlike, you know, being like a 4-year-old. I mean, Ramirta, you've been there, Sita, you've been there. It's amazing. You know, it just starts to shift and people just get into a freed state. And in that childlike state, you can play with form and watch it come and go, come and go, come and go. And that is like, it's a spiritual practice. It gives us the muscle that helps us to do that process with the way that we're living the life that we're living and the world around us. Because the thing is, because forms around us are on a trajectory to just get exponentially more changing all the time, the recipe for suffering and challenge and difficulty is to cling to form. Like the way in which we can go forward from this point and really be miserable is to try to hold on to anything that's formed. Because, I mean, that's always true, right? Like that's what the spiritual traditions all tell you. Don't cling on to form, you know, don't get involved with the fruits of your actions. Don't get worried about how it's turning out. Stay in the process. But in these accelerated time periods, that is even more true. It's a time period where the only way we're going to make it through really with joy in our hearts is to get into a mode of consciousness that allows the changing of forms to be something that is invigorating, delightful, okay, you know, that you're relaxed into an acceptance and a spaciousness around everything is changing. What I thought was true yesterday isn't true anymore. The way I am going to teach my classes is going to change. The way I'm going to do everything that I've done is going to change. And we can enter into a stream of being and perception and awareness that becomes spacious to that, so that things can flow and change around us, and we're not in that place of like, oh no, I just had it down, I just figured it out, and now, you know, they released the 2.0 version, and now I don't even know where the home page is, or, you know, like there's a lot of changes that are constantly happening for us. And you know, so that's the thing, is that we have an extraordinarily challenging time that we've been lucky enough to be born into. But the potential is exponential in this time period for transformation. We have more opportunity to change when everything is changing. You know, all the things that we want to change about ourselves and our lives and the world around us are hard to change in periods of stability. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of push, and sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. You know, you effort and effort and effort because everything is in its solid state form. But when we're in a period of time, as we are now, where things are destabilizing and changing, that means the changes that we want to make, the changes that are ripe to be made, that are positive, can really unfold in a way that is magical and freer and fuller than it would normally be held to be. Does that make sense, you guys? Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that is part of my past, is that I have an undergraduate in philosophy and a master's degree in consciousness studies. And I went to John F. Kennedy University at the time it was in Ananda in the Bay Area. And it was a wonderful program that allowed us to study, this was in the 1986, 87. It allowed us to study paradigms of consciousness across cultures and time periods. And also, one of the things that I was really fascinated with, as many were, was the dynamics of change. Like, what is it that helps the paradigm to shift, because we were all into the paradigm shift. You know, we know we need to shift paradigms, but how does that work, and what does it look like, and what can we do to facilitate it and make it happen? And there was a theory in systems theory that I found to be really useful, and I want to take the time to explain it a little bit. It's from Ila Prigogine, and it's the theory of dissipative structures in systems theory. But basically, it's an understanding that helps to make sense of not only the changes that are happening, but how important it is for us as yogis to do the job we do. And I'll get to that, okay? Why yogis show up in this picture in a big way. So the metaphor that is also true in systems, but we're going to think of it as a metaphor, is that in any given system, at any given level, you have a lot of sounds that are interpreted as information. Okay, they are sounds, but they're language, they're information. So the sound is making sense and everybody's understanding it, and people are communicating with these sounds as information. At a certain point, when systems are beginning, that's all stable. This is the stable, we all understand, we're hearing the sounds, we're good. When systems begin to change, there starts to be an influx of sounds that are not received as information. They're received as noise. So there's sounds happening, but they don't make sense. So it's just static, and stop it. You're making a bunch of noise and it doesn't fit the system, and we don't understand it. And it's not giving us information. It's just noise. And so at the beginning, that the system just sort of tunes it out, right? Like, I don't need to hear that. Change the dial. Let's get that static out of here. But at a certain point, the noise increases to a point where it begins to infiltrate the system, and the system can no longer hold its stability. And the noise overwhelms the system. And at that point, this is the part that's really interesting. At that point, the system, as it dissolves, can either go down, crashing down to a lower level of evolution, like lose coherency and go back to something that's more primal or primordial, you know, losing its intelligence, its coherency, its information. It can become, you know, riots on the street that go bad, or, you know, what happened in Rwanda, or, you know, places where the whole civil code breaks down and you don't get anything out of the noise except for chaos. But at that same moment, you also have the opportunity to actually jump up a level. And that happens when the noise begins to be integrated into the system and received and experienced as information. It was previously noise. Now we're starting to hear it and it becomes information. And so when that happens, there's a new constellation and a new structure that has integrated the noise. It's no longer pushing it out. It's also integrated the intelligence and information that was there before, and it has a higher order that is embracing and including both. So does that make sense? So here's the role of the yogi. The role of the yogi is, how do we get ourselves to go up to coherency in times of chaos? How do we help the system to not go into chaos and dissolve and devolve into a lesser evolved and elaborated and conscious system? How do we push it towards the higher order integration? And the answer is, we help it to move in the direction of coherency. Okay, does that make sense? We help it to become coherent. So let's talk about coherency. Coherency happens in light in this way. We have ordinary light, so like just an average light bulb, like this lamp here. Ordinary light is what scientists would call scattered light, actually. So all of the little photons, every photon has a positive and a negative pole. Every photon does. And in scattered light, I'm going to draw a picture. I have my paper. Hang on. Just a minute here. in ordinary scattered light, it's all, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this. The positive and negative are going in different directions, right? So positives this way, negatives this way on this photon, and this one's oriented that way. So they're all oriented different directions. The native state is somewhat chaotic, right? And coherent light, which is like laser light, a laser beam, what happens is all of those photons align so that the positive and the negative are going the same way. So I'm going to draw a picture of that too. So hang on a second. I should have come with these props. I didn't think about this, but it's just too fun. I can't miss it. So like basically they all align, right? Now all the positives are on top and the negatives are on bottom. So it's aligned. When that happens, the amount of energy that it took to light the incandescent light bulb, the same amount might in a laser beam be able to reach miles and miles across the city or even further, because the power is suddenly condensed and focused in such a way that same energy, but its output and its capacity is exponentially increased. So when that happens though, it doesn't happen little bit by little bit, right? It isn't like one photon goes and another one goes you know, it happens in a sudden and simultaneous shift. Like there's like whoosh, and the whole system comes into alignment. It happens basically through higher order magnetism. And this is again back to the yogi's role in these time changes. So it's the same principle that happens in light that turns scattered light into laser beam light or coherent light is what happens when you have a magnet and you have some filings that are attracted to the magnet. There's a few moments in the beginning when the magnet's held over all the little metal filings, when you get a little tink, tink, right? Tink, tink, couple of filings, tink, tink, there's a little of that, and then whoosh, they all go, right? That is the same thing. It's the same thing in sound. You're listening to the orchestra warming up, and you're hearing the instruments going, and then it starts to kind of maybe have this little swoon moment where it's starting to come together. And then anybody who's ever been to an orchestra concert knows there's this moment when the sound goes ka-chunk, right? It lines up and there's a resonance, a swelling resonance of energy. And in that moment, instantaneously, we've reached the coherency in sound, which is harmony, right? There's a harmonization. And so what is it that brings coherency is a higher order magnetism. The magnet draws all the chaotic filings to itself. And the guru is the magnet, the great divine being that is on another higher level, higher by far than the level we're just trying to make our way up to, attracts all of the scattered particles of our being, of our thoughts, into a higher order coherency. And so the thwarting cross currents of our ordinary mind that goes, I want that, but I don't want that. And I want, you know, we're constantly a bunch of scattered photons with a lot of different orientations making noise, right? And, and it's when we can't put those together. We can't get the photons to line up on our own. It's the same as trying to put ducks in a row, right? It's like you get a couple of things lined up and then this one falls out, and you go over here and you fix that and then get that lined up, and then that one's falls out. That is human condition. It's scattered light, it's scattered consciousness, and it's ordinary human consciousness. We cannot get out of it on our same level. We have to draw from a higher level of consciousness that our job is essentially open up and attune, you know. Our job is to be the filing that goes, yes, magnet. I get it. I'm going, the north, south. I got it. That's our job. Our job isn't to make it all get together or figure out how to get it all together. It's to open the aperture and to align and to attune. And so that's really important in our time right now, because we've got all kinds of intensive dialogues happening on Facebook and in culture and in conversations with friends, and intensive actions out on the streets and things happening. And there's a lot of talk and urge to confront the shadow and deal with the darkness and, and all of that kind of thing. And there's a truth to that that's important. I do not want to denigrate that. I think it's a time for us to include realities that we have excluded, just like pushing out the noise. We're like, no, we're not going to hear that. But it's also extremely important that the most primal and fundamental thing we're doing is increasing coherency. Because if we enter the fray and just go out into the conversation, then we are contributing ultimately to further chaos, and further chaos increases the likelihood of the system collapsing to the lower level. What increases the likelihood of the system reconfiguring on a higher level that is integrative, that integrates the shadow, because it integrates what was formerly noise into intelligent information. That is what our job is. And as yogis, we have a great blessing in being able to know how to do that. Like, that's extraordinary, really. I mean, we take it for granted, but we know how to increase coherency. We know how to align and get our molecules in the right direction. We know how to turn ourselves and orient and to connect to the magnetism of that orientation. Because it's an issue of magnetism. It's an issue of the energy beneath the form, the magnetism within the energy, and ultimately the consciousness that's embedded in the magnetism. That's the yugas too. Like, we're miniaturizations, we're fractal expressions of those ages. And so within us, we have all of those levels. We have the material form, we have the energy, we have the magnetism, and we have the consciousness. But we have to pick up the thread from that highest level. And we can't get to that highest level on our own. We have to do the job of opening and aligning. So that's my theory in a nutshell. So maybe it's a good time to have questions, because that was a lot of content. And I know it's a little complex. And you probably thought we were going to talk about art. And here we are talking about philosophy. But that's how it is. It's transformative. And that's what we're talking about, is transformation.
So if I work on myself and another person works on themselves and we get ourselves aligned, how's that going to move a whole society upward to that higher level when not everybody's doing that?
Right. Well, I think it's a matter of the power equation. When we talked about a little ordinary light bulb and how much energy was involved in lighting that, and what the difference is when that becomes a coherent light beam that's capable of reaching thousands of miles, that's the same principle. So if we just kind of hang out and try to get us and our friends a little more together, I think we neutralize. We're not necessarily going very far. But if we allow ourselves to be channels of this divine intelligence, aligning with it, that we're allowing, like, if we act as conduits and channels of divine intelligence, then we're allowing many, many layers higher than our current reality to be directing the show. Like, if we have to figure out what we're supposed to do, like, oh my God, am I supposed to save the whales or the rainforest, or, work for racial justice? I can't even figure out which way to go, because there's so many different directions that we think our mind, blows a fuse trying to figure out what we should be doing, because we can't, from our individual perspective, really accomplish anything. But what we can do is we can become, if we become instruments, if we become conduits, if we open to the divine reality at the core of our being and attune to it, then the orchestration can take place. We're becoming the instruments in the symphony. And there are energies and actions and events that can happen suddenly and miraculously that we couldn't have even dreamed of or planned. And so if the most important thing any of us could do for this era and its challenges, and the big ones to come with climate change, haven't even gotten there, but if every one of us came to our center and aligned, we would be magnificently orchestrated and directed to do what needs to be done. And we wouldn't all be scattering around trying to do everything. You know, your job might be the whales and my job might be the forest, you know, but we can still trust and move together. Like right now, if you're operating from individual personality, these two are competing. Like, how can you be worried about the whales? We have to care about the forest, you know, like these are, you know, everybody's against the other, and they can't support the whole. And so it's like a glorious diaphanous infrastructure that we allow ourselves to meld into, that can move in a moment, can sweep across the planes of time and space and bring changes that are impossible to the individual. And that's already been happening. I mean, we can look around and we can see God has been moving on the face of the water these days. You know, there has been no doubt that there have been tremendous, divinely orchestrated zeitgeist changes that have been brought about in the wink of an eye, in an instant, that nobody 10 months ago could have plotted and gotten this far. Do you guys have other questions? Like, you can raise your hand, or do you have a raise the hand function on that?
Oh, yeah, Dana, I hadn't thought of this in years, but what I was hearing your exposition on laser light coherence and society and change, and I suddenly remembered there was this tremendous spiritual teacher years ago named Ken Kais Jr., and he was trying to change people's consciousness about nuclear weapons. And he talked about a real phenomenon that I just thought of hearing you, called the 100th monkey phenomenon.
Right, yeah, very similar.
So does that kind of, that's, you know, like it was just one or two monkeys
Right, I
that
can
knew how to wash
up.
the potato.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, and the scientists on this little island just were astonished, or this group of islands, because from just a couple of isolated primates, and then all of a sudden all these surrounding islands, somehow all these animals suddenly were teaching their young how to wash this yam and eat it and get the nutrition. So it sounds like you're familiar with that. That kind of ties in like a more I don't know, just like a real concrete sociological or zoological phenomenon that kind of ties into what you're saying.
Yeah, well, the 100th monkey idea is that of critical mass, you know, that,
Yeah.
and there was a scientist, Rupert Sheldrake, who I really recommend. He has this theory of morphogenetic fields, and it's basically the idea that the field holds the intelligence, and when things enter into the field, it's spread throughout the system. So as an example of a morphogenetic field, his point is that even in an embryo of a human being, there's all this genetic information and material, but no scientist has been able to find how it knows where to go. How does the liver know, you know, the liver growth part go to that part, and the brain here? How does it spatially organize? And what Sheldrake is saying, that the field itself holds the intelligence that draws matter to crystallize inside of it. So the 100th monkey, which has been controversial as a research project, but has been well proven in many different venues, is the idea that if a group of people in one place really start to make significant changes, it becomes contagious, but not through proximity, right? It becomes contagious because the change happens in the field. So a small group meeting in Indiana practicing powerful meditation might have an effect that affects another group over in Colorado or in France. It's the idea that when you enter into the field and make significant changes in consciousness, it enters the information in a way that will begin to create change. And so the critical mass idea is that, okay, it's kind of like the little molecules lining up with the magnet at first. At first, it's like 1 or 2, 3 or 4, 5 or 10. It's slow in the beginning, but at a certain point, that energy enters into the field, and all kinds of people are making the same change simultaneously. And I think it has a lot to do with our very current limited understanding of causation, because we're really fixated for the last few hundred years on linear causation and billiard balls and things that have to have a sequential causation. And synchronicity is a fundamental form of intelligence and causation that I think is part of our era. And it means that things are happening simultaneously, and it's not like A causes B. It's like they happen together at the same moment because they're part of the same picture, the same constellation. And this is something that I work with a lot as an artist and as a transformative arts facilitator, because the mind that we are all well trained in thinks linearly. But when you start doing a creative process, you go into sort of the right brain. And the left brain, and I say that loosely because I think it's, you can really misunderstand it if you think of it as collapsing this intelligence down to the gray matter of the brain. A better way to think of it is that our human intelligence has reason and revelation, has these two modes of consciousness that are mirrored in the way that the brain functions, left and right brain. I don't know, but anyway, back to the left and right brain. The right brain is like the visual capacity to take in information as a gestalt. The left brain is sequential. So the left brain is going to process, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, the letters that are in the word, in the sentence, in the paragraph, and you need the sequence in order to understand the information. If you don't have the sequence, you don't have the information. But if I pick up a cup of coffee and look at it, I don't go, oh, here's the front, and here's the middle, and now this is the top, and this is the string. Oh, it's a cup of coffee. You grasp it in a gestalt because it's a visual shape, right? You go cup or apple or candle, like it's a gestalt function that sees the image, and therefore the intelligence or the information is spatial rather than temporal. So it's almost like we have hemispheres of our brain that are temporal and spatial, is one way to think of it. But we've been focused on linear causation, and the synchronicity and the zeitgeist and all of these sort of critical mass changes that we're talking about are better understood as synchronistic phenomena. So what we're looking for is not how A, B, C causes D, E, F. We're looking for what is the pattern of all of these things that are happening simultaneously. And so it's like we're perceiving the waveform rather than the particle. We're starting to have a sensibility that perceives the causation of this is the energy that's released into the field right now. The energy that's released into the field is like, it's like liquid, it's fluid. Another thing, I hope I'm not getting too crazy intellectual on this, but am I? You're shaking your head yes? Oh, okay. I thought you were going, yeah. Cut it now, make it real. But there's a really interesting parallel with this to me in what I would talk about as the wet brain and the dry brain. Okay, so the dry brain was the theory that most of us got taught in school, that is basically the electricity model, that the brain is up here and it's sending, down the wires of the nervous system, it's sending information, and the telephone wires of the nervous system are getting the information from the brain. And that does happen. That's the nervous system in the brain, the dry brain. But in our time period, in the last decades, we've had a whole lot of discoveries about the wet brain, which is the hormonal and and fluid aspects of intelligence that are present throughout the body on a cellular level, that are in the hormones, that are in our gut, our heart. You know, there's a kind of intelligence that's in the body that doesn't come in a down the wire electric signal mode. It comes in a release of fluid mode. Does that make sense? And so it's like the zeitgeist, or the times that we're in, there's been a release of a new energy. And that new energy is a waveform, it's fluid, it's happening everywhere at once. You know, sometimes there's moments of causation, like the London protests happen after the American protests, so there's linear moments, but the whole of the world is ripe and ready to make changes that are based on a new frequency, a new energy, and a new magnetism that is dispersed in the system everywhere at once. Martin, did you have a question?
Well, it's just like Jack was talking about, reminded me a lot of what I have very limited knowledge of Carl Jung, but he spoke of, I think, what the collective unconscious, and about different archetypes and different parallels that many cultures have had, many of their histories and mythologies. And I think that relates a lot to it also.
Absolutely. Well, Jung was the one who brought the concept of synchronicity back into modern understanding. And he also was the one that began to broach the subject of synchronistic causation in the sciences. So absolutely. And he didn't come to it right away, because he was trained in the, you know, left brain scientific tradition. And so it was a bit of a surprise to him, but he was also, you know, a great empiricist. And so he looked and saw what was happening and observed. And there's a wonderful story of the, what is it called? I'm having the scarab. Okay, so he was working with a client, and the client that he had was a very intelligent mental person who was outwitting him and blocking him at every step of the way. And he would try to help them, but they would be like, no, I'm going to intellectually defend against that. So he knew that he needed something to help her that would reach past the intellect, but he didn't know what it could be. And at that moment, she was telling him about a dream that she had, in which she saw in the dream an Egyptian scarab, you know, and Jung was standing at the window, and in the window flew not the Egyptian scarab, but what's the contemporary form of that? The insect that is very much like that. I can't think of the word. Flew. What?
A beetle.
Yeah, yes, a beetle, right. Flew in the window and landed on his finger, on Jung's finger. And he turns to his client and he says, do you mean like this? and the person was like, yes, you know, and it totally broke her rational defense system. And from that moment forward, her therapy completely changed. And so, and he started to realize that in his healing work, that the healing moment came through these incidents of synchronicity, that as his client was talking and something was being agitated, the birds outside would suddenly start to be agitated, you know, that things outside and inside begin to have connection. And he eventually got to the place where he recognized it this way, which I think is so beautiful, which is that basically that we are ensouled in a living, intelligent cosmos. And so things that happen internally naturally are connecting to things that happen externally, and vice versa. There's an intrinsic connection between the inner world and the outer world. And so, you know, the symptom shows up as a physical or emotional problem, but it also shows up in your experience in your world, and the car accidents and the lost keys, and, you know, all these things that happen externally are metaphoric resonances with things internally. And so I think Jung is going to, when we look back, Jungian understanding is going to be seen as a very critical juncture in the evolution of consciousness.
Okay.
Dana, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great to see you, and thank you so much. So far, it was beautiful, Bard. And it reminds me also of who Jung greatly influenced Joseph Campbell with the power of myth and the the masks of God he talked about, and
Hero's journey.
the whole archetype of the hero's journey of overcoming self limitations and getting lost in the forest and then finding the way through, and the I mean, just the pictorial, how myths have the images, pictorial storytelling, that a simple symbol like a cross has that millions of all countless meanings or resonances, just a symbol. And yet what the symbol is not just of course we know that it's like the visual poetry. So it makes me think also of, I mean, we're talking about a higher road of consciousness, but even in the popular culture, of course, things like Star Wars that was greatly influenced by Jung, and how certain symbols just, they resonate for people all over the world and they don't know why.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So much richness there. I actually met Joseph Campbell when I was in college. He was a great soul, and I love his work, and I love his he was a beautiful soul too. I mean, he was such a humble, present, heart-centered being. It was amazing. But I work with archetypal realities a lot in what I do, and it's very interesting because like, so for instance, when we do a guided moving meditation, I will throw out in the process just little seed moments of symbols, like we're climbing a mountain and you're standing on the mountain peak and you're just seeing the vast distance. That's it. That little seed thought puts everybody's consciousness into the place where they go and they're perceiving the vast distance of their life, not just of the image. And so I think, archetypes are a very powerful language on a deeper level. I mean, ultimately, I think archetypes are causal level, and they're reverberating through, they're clothed in different astral levels, and then they reverberate through to the physical, but they are deep symbols and represent and spring from a very profound level of consciousness. And they're not all like lower consciousness either, they're higher. Like, the thing is that the archetypal symbols that come from causal planes are awakening symbols, like the Holy Grail, the dove, the sun, the mountain peak, there's the cross. These are ancient and enduring and from the future symbols that awaken our consciousness. And so, no, absolutely. And that's why it's so important, the stories that we tell and the myths that we tell. Like, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Ancient Future, which is this performance piece that I did a couple years ago. We took it to a conference on climate change and consciousness in Scotland, in Findhorn, a community in Scotland. But we worked on it for a couple of years, and it was basically, it was a narrative story about the coming dissolution of the world and how to move through it. And I did it, we had an ensemble of, like, I don't know, I think about 16 people from 9 different countries. Palo Alto really helped and supported that. And but why I did it was because I feel so strongly that the imagery and the myths and the stories and the archetypes that we have about how we move through this time have to come from deeper and higher places. If we just rely on the stories that are simply reflecting the current reality or in the darker aspects, if we, this is what Hollywood is specializing in, is films and stories and myths about, the de-evolution of the world, and increasing violence and darkness and cyber and inhumane. But if we bring forth these soul-inspired stories, then we can once again create that coherency that makes the shift. And so in the story that we did, and oh, maybe somebody like Romerti or Amara, you could type in the link to that. I don't know if you can find it, but because you guys could watch it later, because it's really fun to see it. But in the story, we start with the end of the world. That's like the beginning of the story. The climate change escalates, everything starts to dissolve, the known world falls apart. But in most stories, that's the end, right? That's where it ends. We get there, the world falls apart, everything gets dark, and the violent man wins. But in this story, it was the beginning. So the audience actually, as they were arriving to the theater, we staged this fake evacuation on the way to the theater. And when they get there, they're brought into the refuge of the theater as the place where they're going to find safety from all that's collapsing. And we take time at the beginning to show the imagery of dissolution, the heartbreaking imagery. And yet at the same time, we have this wonderful two martial artists who are doing this slow moving Tai Chi in front of the imagery of the world falling apart. And there's this sense of the energy really gathering and strengthening. And then the story starts with this woman who at that moment begins the journey to go and discover the seeds of the new civilization. And she goes through some thresholds, just like the hero's journey, some thresholds of awakening and initiation. And the end of the story is her being able to receive new archetypal energies, because that's actually, I think, one of the most profound and important things happening on the planet right now is the possibility of receiving new archetypal energies. So when I was talking about opening a channel, I think if most of us, if we open a channel, that's what we're going to start to get. We're going to start getting scintillating seeds of new consciousness and new archetypes and stories and myths and I don't know, words fail, but that's gonna be what we're infused with. It's like a cascading waterfall of inspiration that is descending from higher realms. And that is possible. And that's why the yogi's job is so important, because the ordinary person is drawing inspiration from the reflected world on the horizontal level. And that's at best, because it's often dredging it up from the deeper, darker levels, right? And there's very little practice or emphasis or discussion or training in how to draw from the highest levels, how to turn the level, because the where you source your consciousness is what it's all about. Do you source it from what's reflected? Do you source it from your past or the archaic, or do you source it from the highest? And yeah, you got me going, Paul. I love archetypes.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Nina.
I'm going to go get it because none of you guys did. I'll be right back. I'm going to go get the link to that because I want you guys later.
We've got it in now, Dana.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Okay, good. Because if you get a chance, it would be great to look at that. Because all of us are creating these new stories.
Dana, I actually started reading The Stand again, which is a famous novel by Stephen King that's very relevant to our current situation. I started reading it about 2 months ago, and I thought of it because he does start out with the end of the world, and it was a virus that killed almost everybody.
Oh, I never knew
and
that.
then all the good people go to Boulder, and then they try to restart civilization in a new way, and of course the bad people gather in Las Vegas. So anyway,
That's funny.
it does. Anyway, that was my kind of random tie-in with what you just said about how your story started, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see your the drama. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I recommend it. How about somebody who hasn't asked a question? Is there somebody out there that wants to kick in here? Yeah, Amara.
So what I think you might be saying, which is very interesting, is even the stories that we tell, even how we speak, how we express things, it's important to be telling the story that we want to be telling right now.
Yeah,
Always.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and this is one of those things that really hits the spectrum. It's fractal all the way, you know? So yes, we need to tell new cultural stories, and how we tell the stories about what's happening in our lives, right? There's the story that like, oh, they did that, and then that made me this, and victim story 101, you know, there's like stories that we spin that are telling what happened to ourselves, and whatever we tell to ourselves about what the story is the reality that we live out. And so personal growth is a lot about changing stories. You know, it's about shifting to places that the same, you're looking back and describing the same events, but having gone through personal transformation, you tell a very different story, you know, about what happened. And by the time you really clear it out, there is no bad guy that did anything to you, right? There's, you know, there was you gratefully accepting the amazing opportunity for your next level that came to you, you know, through the vehicle of whatever it was that happened. And that's a very different story, you know. I think, so I think all of us, as we change our stories right now, what are we doing in this virus time? Is this like, oh man, now I can't do this, I used to be able to do that, you know, that's a story. Or are we tuning into the story of, oh my gosh, thank you, God, I am in the most enlivening, enlightened period of history ever. The sparks are flying. How lucky I am to be here. This is such a galvanizing, historic, momentous moment. And I have the spiritual tools to make hay with this, you know? I can draw in the light, and I can be a beacon, and I can connect to people, and I can be contagious to the world around me with the energy of higher consciousness, of love, of beauty and goodness, you know, all of the qualities of the divine. We got to fight the contagion with contagion. The most contagious thing is love and God and divine presence. And so that's something that we can spread.
And I love the way you say we begin by spreading it inside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then that itself is a contribution to that coherence that you were talking about. And we're making a contribution to the change, to the new, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the eyes of spirit see it so differently. You know, from material level, you might go, oh, well, that person's really doing a lot to help because they're marching on the streets, or this person is not doing very much because they're sitting home taking care of an elderly relative or whatever. You know, we have all these scales of influence, but the outer form is actually not the most important layer of what's happening. The person who is generating a high frequency of love in their hearts is affecting the field the most. And they may be out in the street, or they may be at home and no one even knows their name.
It reminds me of a cartoon I saw years ago. Showed this picture. One picture showed a guy's on a desert island. He's just sitting under this palm tree peacefully, you know. It's no, he's stranded or whatever. The other guy shows this guy. He's sitting at a desk. He's working real hard. And the caption just says, wasted and useful lives. It doesn't say which life, he doesn't make clear which life is wasted, which life is useful. You know?
Right. That's
it's kind of like, he goes,
yeah.
It's never what it seems to be.
I want to say, thank you so much. This is so helpful and so relevant for me and my work too. So thank you so much. I want to add something that I think is relevant. On Saturday, I had a reading with a psychic reading with a woman I hadn't met before. I hadn't had a reading before, but I was really drawn to her. And what the first thing she said to me, she said, I want you to know that you have created a huge field around you and your home and your children that is so bright and so luminous that the angels are rejoicing about this work that you have done. And it was shocking to me because it's such a private work to constantly meditate and pray, and it's so intimate and insular that I was blown away that she said that, because I thought, really, someone's onto it? Like, you know, it was so funny, but it was very comforting. And I wanted to comfort everyone tonight with that thought that the work that everyone's doing is creating this lovely umbrella over you and your system, whatever that is. And it actually is exactly what you're saying, Dana, that I just got confirmation of that it has its own energy, it has its own form, it is protective, and that there is a rejoicing going on in the heavenly realms when we do this work, and that is what's really real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I have to grab a cord, you guys. Don't go away. Put it together and plug it in.
I'll just take this time while she's recharging something to mention what we're going to have next week, 1 week from tonight, and that is a Sanskrit scholar and a Vedic astrologer who will be talking about, especially in the United States, but also worldwide, and other things that are applicable to individuals, but what astrologically is going on right now. And he's especially going to spend time with the chart of the US, with the natal chart of the US and current transits, which greatly affect or have drawn or predict what we're all going through right now. So the national karma, the world karma at this time, he's going to be talking about. And he's a very fun and good speaker too. So I think you'll enjoy his insights and his wisdom next week.
Is that Drupada?
No, it's not Drupada. His name is Dharma Widman, and he's a devotee, a disciple of Yogananda, but also a Vedic astrologer.
You know, that really also, I love astrology and play around with it a lot. And that's really archetypes also. Like, you know, in this time period, I won't speak about specifics, but, you know, we are definitely dealing with the energies of Saturn and Pluto. And, you know, these are long-standing archetypes inside of us. And Pluto especially, like, you know, at the beginning of the year, we had Saturn and Pluto conjunct, which is right next to each other, vibrating together. And Pluto is like plutonic, and it rules the underworld. It rules plutonium. You know, it rules volcanoes and things that erupt from deep places. And that's like right up against the Saturn archetype or energy of structures and forms and walls and barriers and boundaries. And, you know, so it'll be fun when you guys, and I hope to be there too, when we're all there for that talk, to think about those energies, because, you know, like David Frawley says, the planets are ultimately inside of us. You know, the outer planets are reflections of the inner planets, which is, you know, quite a different thought than the current society holds about causation. So, other questions or thoughts that we can dive into? If not, I can keep going, but.
The Bible, I think, in the book of Ezekiel talks about when God showed Ezekiel the working of the universe, it was all wheels inside of wheels. And there's a saying, I think, I don't know if it's from the Bible or if it's related to it, as above, so below.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in our time period, we'd see those as vortices inside of vortices, or spirals inside of spirals, you know, like, and that is like each era has its own understanding. It's the same truth. It's the Sanatana Dharma, but it's fleshed and given new wineskins and new metaphors and new dimensions. I mean, it's really, if you think about what we've been through recently in the last few hundred years, it is an extraordinary time period for the knowledge base, the evolution and history of science and all that has shifted, the material world dissolving into energy, which then gives way ultimately to quantum physics and all the way down to, particles vibrating little filaments, everything ultimately being frequency. There's these huge revelations of the universe, the expanded universe. And in astronomy, we have probably one of the biggest, periods of growth in knowledge is in the field of astronomy that they've ever had, or that it's having a heyday, and so my mom, I don't know age-wise, but my mom went to school and learned that we lived in a galaxy, and that someday we might discover another galaxy. This is just one generation, right? And now we are turning the telescope to the darkest part of space during a refurbishment process on the telescope and discovering, oh my gosh, that dark part of space that we set the thing on for a few days suddenly revealed, trillions of galaxies. So the exponential size of our universe, it is enormous. And yet at the same time that we're having this sort of Renaissance breakthrough expansion, we're having also very intense contractions that bring us back down to tribal levels of interaction. And so it's such a contrast. The contrast is getting more and more increased during this time period. The duality is really enhanced. But it's like at the same time, I feel like what that's also saying is it's not just like duality like this, it's like there's a vortex, there's a seed of a new reality that is spinning and vibrating, and around it, it's evoking, like perhaps the remnants of the resistance. Like Davy had this great phrase, I love it, you guys are going to love this, like dinosaurs on steroids. It's like there's that's being evoked in response, but ultimately that spiral of new energy is far more powerful. And the more, like, talk about our story, if we could be talking about the story of the incredible universe that we live in, the story of quantum physics and the world shimmering into new potentials, and these are the stories that move us into the new reality and the lived experience of it. So I work with quantum creativity quite a bit, because in the creative process, that's something else I'd like to talk to you guys about, is in the creative process, one of the reasons I think that creativity is so important for all of us is that in essence, what creativity does is it takes us to the place that is absolutely in the present moment, where we are not coming from what we learned in the past, what we already know, what we thought about already, and we're entering into a territory that doesn't know what's going to happen. Like, that's the essence of the creative moment. You don't know yet what the painting is going to be, or the dance move that's going to come out. If you did, you would just be rehearsing. You wouldn't be creating, right? You would be replicating. The creative moment has no idea what's going to happen. And so it brings you into this territory. And for a lot of people, that is kind of a scary place at first. But what's beautiful about the transformative arts process is it makes that place move from being scary to being delicious. Like, you start to be able to, just by the sort of microcosm of doing it with the creative process, you gain the sensibility of like, being in the unknown, being in that place where I don't know, is a rich and fertile place. And I don't have to close it down or hide from it or quickly jump over it or solve it quickly so I don't have to bear the unbearable unknowingness of it. I can just be in it. And when you are in that space of the present moment, when you are in that territory that is in the now, utterly in this moment now, that's when you're a very open aperture for the divine also. Like that's when you can receive the influx of new information, because you are not holding in your brain, this is the way it is, always has been, always should be, this is this is what you've let go of. And so I see the creative process as something that's extremely valuable for all human beings, whether or not they have any artistic talent, irrelevant any artistic inclinations. We all need to learn and practice being creative. And that creativity will also expedite the kind of changes that need to happen in the world, because we will be opening our hearts and minds to utterly new ways of being and doing that aren't coming from habit, tradition, prejudice, assumption, inclinations that want to gel and bind it to what's already been. Creativity cultivates courage to open to new realities and allows you to begin to be ever more subtle and refined in your ability to reach into and draw from the unknown, from the future, from what is not yet in existence. And so the more we're creative, the faster these changes can happen in very positive ways, because true creativity also is vibrating from a higher level. There, once again, just like we were talking about before, there's horizontal levels and vertical levels, and Swami talked about that a lot. Like originality, right, in our culture tends to mean like breaking the rules, doing something no one's ever done before, and being more weird and more out there than they were last year, at the biennial, when they give awards to shocking things, because breaking expectation and disrupting, that's seen as original in the world. But true originality is from the originality. It's coming from the deepest spaces inside of us. And when we do that, when we come to our core and our center, then we're able to bring forth what is genuinely new, rather than sort of cleverly different, right? Like there's all these new things that are really just like egoic, clever iterations of something that's shocking and disruptive, rather than genuinely new perceptions. And so I think that the creative process teaches all of us to be original. And every single one of us, just like Yogananda said, and Swami emphasized too, that we're all beautifully individual souls. There will never be another soul like ourselves. And we have a destiny to, like, I loved how you chose the Noble New, right, for the little poem in your advertisement for this series, sing songs that none have sung, think thoughts that ne'er in brain have rung, And there's something really powerful about that, but it's powerful when it comes from the level of the soul. Like when it comes from ego, it's like, I'm so special and, I'm different and I need to do it different so I'll be noticeable. That's a very shallow and tinny kind of individuality. And Yogananda says the true personality doesn't even emerge until you start to get into the deeper levels of spiritual life, right? That's when you really bring forth who you are. But the difference about who you are is not a superficial difference. It's something that is even beyond you. It's like flowing through you. It's allowing your particular constellation to be glorified by the divine reality.
Hi, Dana. It's Andrea.
Hi, it's so good to see you.
I'm very inspired. I wondered if you would have like a mini assignment idea for us. Any of us who are kind of like thinking, okay, I need to go ahead and be more creative and tune in that way. Do you have any like little like exercise that might start us off?
Ooh, that's a fun idea. I think that, disrupting how your body moves in a sense of like keep getting it out of its contained ways of being can be really helpful. So like on one level, it can be as simple as like just starting to let yourself do things differently, sit in a different chair, brush your teeth with the other hand, do things that are a little different just to open your perception, but also moving your body in a way that allows energy to infuse it. like when we do our classes, we just turn on the music, and of course the type of music helps and makes a difference, but just let your body move with that music a little bit, like just sea fronds in the ocean, you know. And doing that kind of shifts you out of your brain, out of your thinking mind, and puts you into like your feeling, perceiving self. And even if you do that just for like 3 minutes, honestly, 5 minutes, and then imagine as you're doing it, like you're listening to the music, you're moving, and just let yourself imagine, like, I feel like I'm sailing on the ocean, or I'm floating on a cloud, or I'm swimming in a river. And so you've taken yourself and activated the imaginal self and the kinesthetic intelligence. So the kinesthetic intelligence is a very fast route, like just moving your body to music in an inspired way. I'm not talking about la la la, you know, like dance steps or dance ways of being that are more just like rubbing the energy. I'm talking about letting yourself move in a way that feels the energy. And it's amazing. And then if you have a few more minutes, take a pen and or chalk pastel and, you know, let yourself draw for a moment. Not a picture, not a form, but just energy. You know, yellow sprouting out and red coming down or whatever, you know. So I don't know if that's doable. Is that doable?
I think so.
That's a great question. Thank you. And by the way, I am having some online courses too that are coming up, and I'd love to talk to you about it afterwards. Are you still in Nevada City?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You know, the things that, one thing I'd say just in reference to that is it's surprising how little it takes. Like you would think that to get into the creative space, you'd have to set aside hours and dedicate half a day or whatever. But honestly, you can, in 5 or 10 minutes, significantly shift your energy into a creative flow.
And so do you sometimes do different things to get yourself into that creative space and then look again at a problem? Or, I mean, do you ever do it that kind of mundanely or linearly?
Yeah, I would say so. Also, just thinking about, getting in the habit of thinking about things from multiple or different perspectives than usual. You know, like an example I'll give was one time when I was going from Italy to England, and I was going to teach offer an event at a yoga center in London that was opening up. And I came across the border and told them about this workshop, and they didn't like the word workshop. And so I was quickly apprehended and taken to a little room and questioned extensively. And and I ended up being sent back to America. That's a whole nother story. But here's the point I'm going to get to, is that I had to teach a class in another week back in Italy, because I was just kind of going over to England for a weekend before this happened. And the airfares, you know, were really expensive. And how do I suddenly, you know, pay for a last minute ticket to get back? And so, but at this time, the volcanoes were happening over Iceland. This is the era. Do you remember that? And I thought, well, where does no one want to go? Iceland. And in fact, all of the smog was drifting away from Iceland, right? It wasn't coming towards Iceland. It was being emitted from Iceland and bothering everyone else. So I just booked an incredibly cheap ticket from America to Iceland and then could easily hop back to Italy. So that's just an example, like turning it around and thinking about it differently. And thinking about it playfully too. Like actually, even in that same event, I could tell you an example of playful. So I'm in the brig here, you know, in England, and I'm making friends with the guards because they're all feeling sorry for me because nobody really thinks I should be there by this point. But it's kind of like once you're in the system, you know, there's no turning back. And so they're kind of friends. And so what they do in this situation, if they refuse you entry into a country, which is what happened, is they take you by armed guards through the airport to the plane, and they hand your passport to the pilot. Okay, so we're walking through the airport, and you know, it's kind of embarrassing, right? Like there's guards around me, like I look like a criminal, and I go, you guys, this is embarrassing. Could we pretend that I'm somebody famous? And they were like, sure. And they were like, right this way, Miss Anderson, right this way. And they totally got into it. And we're all like pretending that I'm like super famous, being escorted by these guards to the plane. And so, like, you know, it's just like taking a moment that could be really heavy, you know, and you could be telling the story of like, oh my God, you know, and playing with it and letting it be more playful. And they loved it. I mean, I loved it, they loved it. And then it was hilarious because we walked past all of the long lines and all of the people, and we get right onto the plane, and I'm first into the plane. And then as people come in, they see, why is she sitting back in economy? Even have a first class ticket, you know. So anyway, so I think that if you practice the habit of allowing things, like when things happen, to not so quickly jump into the story that defines it, you know, not so quickly go, well, this is what's happening and this is my reaction to it, but to kind of go, huh, what if I flew towards the volcano? What if I did something that is different? And maybe it's not the best idea, but even holding your brain there for a minute to look at it from another perspective can open up what is a better idea. You know, there's a concept of bushwhacking into the territory that is unknown, and it's not like every trail you take is the answer, but you're opening the territory by letting yourself hold open that space, kind of like we talk about in meditation, or, you know, not to react right away, to hold that meditative space and not immediately respond. But it doesn't all have to be, you know, totally silent yogi zone either. It can be holding a space that's fluid and creative, that allows you to think about it, something 10 ways before you land on the way that is the, you know, instead of quickly collapsing into, this is how I'm going to interpret this. So we have just a few minutes left, right? So why don't we do something right now, which is everybody can take a minute to, can you guys all stand up, or if you're sitting down and you can't stand up, just kind of let your body, I'm gonna get where you can see, just open your body a little bit, move it a little bit, even just your arms or your neck or your fingers. If you can't get up, that's fine. Then breathe. And let yourself become like seaweed, okay? Just imagine yourself as seaweed, and your arms and your fingers are floating in space. And close your eyes now for a few moments. Just keep going. Keep feeling the fluidity. And let yourself be in the ocean now for a moment. Feel the ocean waves. Whoosh, the energy that's flowing through you and around you. Let your body move with those waves. Even if it's just subtle, let yourself experience that. And then move upwards out of the ocean and let yourself come into the air and feel the cool, crisp air. And start to feel yourself rising into the clouds above, and feel your being expand as you enter into the clouds. Now let that movement happen, but as a cloud being. Feel your body moving and playing inside of a cloud. How does that feel different? And notice, is it cool? Is it warm? And then from that cloud space, continuing to move and feel yourself in the cloud, just take a moment to look down to the earth and see your life below. See your ordinary daily life below. And send it an energy that you have access to by being up in the sky in this cloud. Draw that energy, this higher stratospheric energy, and send it down to your life below. Channel it, maybe even reach higher to the stars or the sun, drawing the energy and channeling it down to your life, your home, your family, your loved ones, your neighborhood. Give it the energy that it's needing in this moment. Take a few moments to just play with this and feel it. And then still in your body moving, let that energy be given in a broader way. Send it out. Using your hands, using your body, send that energy throughout the lands, to the whole of the nation, to the whole of the earth. And then bring that to a close and let yourself gently descend down to the earth, through the sky. And imagine yourself now feeling your body landing on the earth, touching the earth. And before you open your eyes, enjoy the feeling of you expanded out of ordinary identity. And let that energy continue to vibrate as you open your eyes and bring your attention back to the group. And just feel now that energy blessing every single person in this group, all those who have gathered in this time, continuing from this more spacious sense of self to channel and offer that energy. Yay!
Thank you, Dana.
So was that, did you guys enjoy that? Could you feel a shift at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.